For me, as a priest, and a lot of clergy I know would say this as well, one of the surprising revelations of pastoral ministry is just how meaningful funerals are. And even when the person that's died is somebody who's very close to you, having just lost my father, this is very special to me, and I helped in the taking of his funeral, and then just 2 weeks ago today I actually interred the casket with his ashes in, and so this is very close up and personal. And at no point in any of that process did I think, oh my goodness, does this mean that God has forgotten me or anything? No, death is something that is going to happen to all of us, and it's something which is very mysterious and very sad, and yet has something of the sorrow of God about it. It's got something of God's grief over the way his world has become. And God was present in my father's death. God was present in my father's funeral and in our burial of his last remains. And those were very precious and poignant moments when, like Jesus weeping at the grave of Lazarus, you have a sense of the divine sorrow which is there with you and holding on to you. Doesn't make it easier, but you just know that God is in there with you. Now, easy for me to say that because that's what I believe and that's what I feel. There's a lot of people who would say, like Dylan Thomas, do not go gentle into that good night. I've often thought of that poem, which was about the death of his father, when facing the death of my own father, and I simply don't agree with the way that Dylan Thomas said it. There may be a rage against the dying of the light, but there is also a sense of, okay, the sun has to set. We know this. There will be a new morning, and we are looking forward to that day. And that's the great thing. Paul says in 1 Thessalonians, don't grieve like people who have no hope. He doesn't say don't grieve. He says don't grieve in the hopeless fashion, like a pagan who has nothing to hope for. Then it's just wild wailing and grieving without any destination at all. So there is an appropriate Christian grieving. And when I think, well, what did Jesus come to do? Jesus came basically, and he tells us this on every page, of course, to establish God's kingdom. That is to say, to establish the sovereign and saving rule of God on earth as in heaven. That wasn't just a matter of Jesus healing people, having parties, being nice to old ladies and stray dogs and small children and all the rest of it. He did all that stuff, but something deeper had to happen. Jesus wasn't just a glorified spiritual social worker. The cross and the kingdom go together, as I said before. And what that means is that there are powers of evil which have been unleashed by our own folly and sin. We've given them the right to rule and tyrannize over us and over the world. And on the cross, Jesus defeated those powers. And as a result, the work of his kingdom, which he'd already begun in his life, was enabled then to be launched fully when he rose from the dead 3 days after his death. So that this is the work of new creation. And when bad things happen in our lives as they do, when sad things happen in our lives as they do, we as Christians hold this within the picture of the sorrow over the old creation and the joy of the new. And as we tell that story, there are awful things that happen, but those awful things can be held lovingly and wisely within the embrace of the God of whom we speak when we tell that story.